So we have our orange background on our canvases. We're going to start with the yellow. So I would go for a medium yellow, whatever yellow you think would look good on top of your particular orange you have on there. And then I was thinking we could go for like a prairie landscape, which you would think would be more simple, and it is because it's really flat, but it'll have a lot of texture in it. So start by just kind of making a horizon. I'm twisting my brush as I go to get line variations. So made the horizon sort of roughly in the middle, but you can put it wherever you want. And then similar to how we did the water landscape, the seascape, it'll be the same idea, but with ground instead of water, that there'll be sort of smaller marks at the top and larger marks at the bottom to give the sense of perspective. So for this one, we're going to just make some horizontal marks across. You don't need to be too particular with where the marks go. It'll just be the underpainting to give the ground more dimension when we add the layers on top. So just want something like that, or however you want to do it, but generally it sort of gives the impression of maybe little hills or divots in what will eventually be grass. I'm just going to give that a minute to dry just a bit. It's really humid in my apartment today, so things aren't drying as quickly as I would like, but we can still work with that. And if it's not drying on your end either, that's okay, because for the first layer here, it'll be okay. So for the next stage, when you're ready, I'm just grabbing a really small brush. And then similar to how we did the little waves, we'll just be doing grass. So it'll be little lines, but vertical instead of horizontal, just to indicate some grass. And I'm just going in with the same yellow.
Smaller.
And you can go. And kind of what I'm doing is where the edges of the yellow meets the orange, I'm going to start with blending that with just these little lines. At the horizon line, it might even be closer to dots than lines. And for my painting, as the initial horizontal lines dried, they're a little more translucent. So when I put the yellow lines over top, they kind of stand out more. So if that's the same on your end, then you can put some lines in the yellow lines that you did already. And we're not really looking for super precise. We're just looking for an overall flow of textures. I like getting into the flow of these little marks because I find it to be pretty meditative sometimes.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of get lost in it a little bit.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yes. There's always something really satisfying about just laying down paint and the physical feeling of it, the flowy liquid paint.
Mm-hmm.
If we were doing really big landscapes, we would spend hours and hours and hours just adding little more and more layers of these little marks.
And so you were saying that these kind of lay underneath the next layer that we're doing and build up a bit of texture, kind of?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Which is why they don't need to be super precise, but it's also why we're kind of going around the edges of the yellow marks, because it's going to help blend the overall look.
And are they getting bigger towards the foreground?
Yeah, I would make them a little bigger as you go. It doesn't have to be too
Drastic.
noticeable at this stage.
And
Even in the foreground, blades of grass wouldn't be too huge.
Yeah, that's right. And do you feel like do you think it makes more sense to keep the paint a little bit like chunkier so that we're getting some of that brush mark texture, or a little bit more flowy with a bit of water?
I'm just using the straight up paint. Like I'm not really watering it down because we're making such small marks. Our brush doesn't have to be carrying that much paint for too long.
Mm-hmm.
So with my brush and this weight of paint that I'm using, one brush full will make 5 to 10 marks.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you kind of turn the brush as you go and get the paint off all sides. My hand is definitely getting in the yellow at the bottom of the canvas, but that is also okay.
I never thought about that, but my hand is cramping a little bit. For sure. Just from the repetition, I think.
Oh, yeah. If your hand is cramping and you feel like you want to go a little bit faster and play it fast and loose, you can also do that because this is the first layer. It'll be okay to just go over it again later with the next layer. My hand's getting a little crampy too, but it's because I still have that sprained wrist a bit. And we're kind of riffing off of an impressionistic sort of style with these little marks. So ultimately, as we go and build these layers, the precision of the marks will matter very little. Because we're just going for a texture, especially in the first few layers. When you're doing this technique on your own, this is a really great opportunity to listen to some music and just get really lost in the music and in the repetitive strokes. Well, lately I haven't been listening to too much music when I'm painting. It's usually like the TV on in the background, which maybe I need to find some new music.
Mm-hmm.
And as we reach the bottom of the canvas on mine, because the paint's going on in thicker layers, it will need to dry for a little bit before we go on the second round. Just going back up into some areas that I think I might want to put more marks, but it's really too much to do up there. Still pretty wet on some parts, so it'll need a little bit to dry on my end for sure. Hopefully it's not as humid where you guys are.
Okay.
And what are we mixing for our wash then?
It's going to be sort of a medium green.
Okay.
You could even go for like a brightish green for this layer.
Mhm.
So this is, it says pale green, but it's something like that color,
Okay.
which is a pretty bright secondary color green.
And if it's a wash, are we watering it down just a little bit as well?
Yeah.
Right.
So for that, get your brush. I'm using a larger brush to cover more area at one time. Dab it in the water a bit and then wipe it on the sides, and then pick up just a little bit of the paint and then move it to another part. And then don't let your brush get too wet. You just want to leave a little bit of the pigment on the canvas. So let's see how this goes. Yeah, so it should cover it, but not really change the light and dark of it. And just like before, when it's wet, it'll pool into little droplets, but just gently keep running your brush over it and it'll smooth out. If some of the yellow is still wet, it will pick up the yellow a little bit. Don't worry about it too much. If you find that you don't like the yellow spreading as much as it is, you can just do other drier parts of the canvas and come back to that spot later. I find too, because the paint is watered down a bit, a little gets spread out over a longer or a broader area compared to the more undiluted paint. . Kind of going over it once I have an even distribution of the paint with almost a cross hatch random brush stroke as I spread the paint out. Because the point of this is we definitely want to make sure there's lots of texture in there. And even though we were making deliberate marks with the yellow, ultimately some of these more random marks will give it a bit more of a natural feel. Right now it's pretty abstracted still in the simpler layers. And if you wanted it, the more realistic you want it, the more layers and layers and layers of textures and washes you would add. Again, I'm just going to let that layer dry for a little bit. How's everybody finding the process so far?
Good. I'm liking that it's similar to the water one we did, in that we're kind of building up these layers just in a different way. It's cool.
Mm-hmm. The basis for a lot of painting is just layers and textures and things like that. So this is a really fairly simple way of building up the textures, but it'd be the same if we were painting like a human figure or a still life or something, that we just build up the layers and shapes and marks and everything. So this is a more solid field, but this type of way of painting can help really hone your brush skills too.
Yeah, no, definitely. And for somebody like me who doesn't really understand acrylic paint, I feel like this is starting to expand upon the different qualities or like possibilities with acrylic paint, and how like, you know, the fact that it dries this quickly also, you know, lends its hand to like how adaptable it can be.
It's very versatile.
Yeah, it's not as fixed as oil paint or watercolor paint can be. Yeah, in that way. Well, hi, Aggie. Aggie's just joining us now here too.
Morning.
I'll just...
Here I'm going to do the next layer I'm going to do is a blue. So I just have a medium shade blue here. And I'm going to take my small brush again. And this time I'm going to put the blue near where the darker parts are, where the green covered the orange. Concentrate more on those areas, but still trying to blend into the lighter yellow areas, but concentrate a little bit more on the darker areas. And we might not need to put as many brush strokes over the blue this time. We can use it a bit more sparingly. And then that'll be our next layer here. And along the horizon line, making smaller marks, maybe something closer to dots. I find that this blue layer really starts to help it come together. So it's an in between the orange and the yellow layers. And even now, if I sort of take a little step back and look at it, it's starting to come a bit more alive. And as I get near the bottom where the marks are getting slightly bigger, something I like to do when painting a lot of grass is when you're making the visual lines, kind of arrange them in an arc. So sort of kind of like that type of shape, like an arc or maybe a crown or something. And it's just to give the impression that the blades of grass are just blowing in the wind. That's a little thick application there, but that's okay. It's a lighter layer of the blue, so I think that's good from my end. Now we'll just let that dry, and in the meantime, I'll clean my water jar.
Ahead, Jay.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back in with the yellow with our small brush, and similarly to how we did the blue marks, we're going to do yellow. They can be pretty sparsely put down, but instead of focusing on the darker parts, we're going to focus on the lighter parts and blend it a little bit. So I'll start and I'll show you how it goes.
And as we do this, are we kind of squinting and looking for those lightest parts of the painting? Because we want to leave some of our mid-tones, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. That's a mistake I always make, as I go over my mid-tones and then it starts to get a little confusing.
That's a good point. And again, it's not about precision, it's just about overall tone and texture.
Right. No mistakes, only happy accidents.
That's right.
I love painting with yellow. It's so happy.
I know, it might be my favorite color. One of my favorite colors. Yellows and greens, I just really love them.
I agree.
I had an apartment one time that we were allowed to paint whatever we wanted. And they painted the kitchen like a buttercup yellow, and it was the best. I loved it. It's also really sunny, so that helped help the mood in the kitchen.
Yeah, no kidding. That's lovely. Do you find it more difficult to paint flat than on an easel? Is using an easel like your preferred method of painting?
It depends on what I'm painting, really. I think for this type of texture, these little dots, it's easier to paint down because you can sort of approach the canvas from a different how do I explain this? I think for me, painting these little marks vertically is a bit more difficult than like on a flat surface. I don't know how to explain it. It's just for me, it's physically a little easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. You kind of have different vantage points a little bit.
Yeah. But if I'm doing more blending, then painting on an easel is a little more conducive to what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Although as I stand in my kitchen and leaning over it, can't do it for too long because your back's gonna get sore.
Yeah.
A couple hours fine, but a whole day, not sure about that.
No. So what's the average amount of time you spend on a piece if you're gonna go start to finish?
For something like a landscape like we're working on now, I haven't done too many of them. Like I went through a period where a few years I would do lots and lots of landscapes. And if I were to really go in on it and just layer after layer after layer after layer, it can be maybe 12 hours, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how big it is and how many layers I want to add.
And on a bigger canvas, do you paint this finely still, or do you paint in broader strokes on a bigger?
A combination of both.
Okay.
On a bigger canvas, I usually do little tiny marks like this. It takes a lot longer, of course, but it's worth it in the end.
Just because it builds up some of that complexity?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. I guess if we're going to post this to YouTube, if anybody has any questions, if anyone has any questions, they could post them in the comments or send us an email.
Yeah.
You cover it in the next video.
That works. The camera doesn't translate it as well, I've noticed, when I've been looking on the other screen I have here.
Okay.
But these layers, as you go, particularly with the blue and the yellow, are brightening up the canvas a lot. The colors are a bit muted on the screen, but on your end, it should be brightening up, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm getting quite a bit of contrast, actually. I'm definitely going about things differently in some areas, but
yeah, that's okay. Painting is all about expressing your own personality through your brush strokes, and no two paintings are going to look the same or even have the same types of marks.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's
fully just go with your heart.
Because yours looks like a little like frolicking meadow, and mine
Yeah.
looks like the foothills or something. Because it's very like almost tree lined. I've really done lines instead of dots.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can share mine really quickly, just to show the difference. So mine looks like trees, I think, than a meadow, but I think it'll still come out looking pretty cool. We'll see.
Yeah.
Oops. There we go. Back to Jay.
I definitely do have a tendency when I'm painting fields that the word frolicky kind of resonates. And what I have planned for this too is we're going to go in and add spots of like meadow flowers and more color and layers. And with the orange base, it gives a lot of depth. And then with we did yellow and then a wash of green sort of as the medium. And then the blue and yellow, which when you mix them make green, kind of gives an overall fresh color feeling to it, I find. So similar to Impressionist painters, we're breaking the green down into its parts by using layers of yellow and blue. that yellow dry for a little bit.
Ready.
Okay, so for this stage, I'm going to turn my canvas sideways. We're going to work on the sky. I think it might be nice just with the colors and the way this is working out with the background color of the orange to make it kind of a sunset type of sky. So I'm just taking the yellow again. And I'm just dragging it through. I'm going to water it down a little bit so that it flows better. Just dragging my brush across and making wavy-ish lines. And again, everybody's is going to look different with how you apply the paint, how you feel that your hand is going to want to make these marks. So something like that. That was a nice contrast for me from all these little meticulous small marks to just do broader brush strokes again. It was a good break in motion.
Yeah, it feels good to be able to just spread paint around a little bit.
Totally. And then next, the next color you're going to need is a pink. I have this sort of just medium pink color. If you don't have a pink on hand, you can mix the red and white. And as Robin says, the red is a very bossy color, so add a lot more white than red until you get a shade of pink that you like. That's a bit on the medium light side. And then I'm going to follow along the underside of these yellow marks, sort of underline them in the pink. You can let the pink touch the horizon because it's a lighter color. It's a big glob there, that's okay. These lines are drying a lot faster, which is nice. And as it dries, particularly with that yellow, it's becoming less opaque. So it's dry enough that I'm going to rinse my brush from the pink. And I'm going to go over the yellow again with another layer of yellow. Not really looking for precision. Again, it's just the flow. I'm liking that so far. Depending on how neat your lines are, mine are a little, there's some texture around the edges that I'd like to clean up. So I'm going to go in with the background orange color again and just redefine some of the orange parts of that. And I'm going to use something between the medium and the larger brush that I've been using, or the small and large rather. If you're feeling a little unsure about where to put your next marks, take a step back, squint a little bit, and take the whole thing in as one image. And it'll give you a better idea of where you might want to add different layers of the colors. The yellow is definitely going to need another layer on there. It's not as bright as I would like it to be, but we can keep going with that. While that dries, what I might actually do at this stage is go in with my small brush again. And I'm going to make that pink a little brighter by adding, this is just some neon pink, but you can add a bit more red or a bit of orange or something just to punch up the pink a bit so it's not as pale. Or if you have another kind of pink, mix that in as well, something that's a bit brighter. And to go with the frolicking meadow theme that I have going here, I'm just going to add little bits of pink flowers here and there, just by little adding little dots in certain places. For something like this too, it's a good idea to every minute or so take a step back and squint a bit and see how your composition is looking overall. If you don't want to put any flowers in at all, you can definitely skip this step as well and just go in with more layers of the yellow and blue. Just add a little tiny bit at a time. If you feel like you've overworked any particular areas, you can just let it dry and then go in and repeat the process that we've done over top of that particular section. And it'll blend in really easily with what's going on the rest of your canvas. So I'll hold it up closer to the camera again so you can see better.
Are we wanting to keep the sky quite chunky then right now? Like we're not trying to blend anything too much, hey?
Not at this point. I'm keeping it pretty chunky. If we're going to do this in another, I know we're at about an hour and a half now. If we're going to do this in another um, part, we can go in and blend it a bit more.
Okay.
We'll by just doing more washes.
I was even
Although sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say I was even thinking, Jay, you and I could keep going if folks want to log off for today, and then we
Sure,
could simply follow your video next week as well.
that works.
So it'll be like you're teaching, but you're not. And then I'll have to basically anybody who wasn't here today will have homework, and anybody who was here today can um, even try it again if they wanted to. If you wanted to paint over what you did and give it another shot, you could.
That sounds good. Whenever I use this particular technique too, I go over it and over it and over it over the course of a few days to add more and more layers, but keeping it kind of abstracted like this is nice too. Like I kind of like the chunky sky on mine, but if we wanted to blend it, we can definitely try that out.
That's what I did, but only because I paint in oil sometimes, and so my tendency is to blend everything out. But I'm sort of doing the same thing where I'm just going back over it.
Yeah. For me, my instinct for the sky was because the ground is really sort of softer and smaller marks. The contrast with the chunkier sky is kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give that a little bit to dry again.
Yep.
So as Robin mentioned, I do like to use the craft paints because they blend a bit more. If you're using a heavier paint out of a tube, you can water it down a little bit. And then the next thing I'm going to do is in the meadow, I'm liking the pink flowers and the textures and everything. And I'm going to go in with white to make little white flowers. So I'm going to use it even more sparingly than I did the pink and add them in little groups. Here and there. It can get easier as the layers advance as well, because you'll be adding for each layer as you build on top, the more top layers will get fewer marks in general.
And so are you just bringing down colors that you kind of have in the sky a little bit as well, or could you make up any color to do?
You can make up any color, but that is what I did with the pink really. The orange is already there underneath everything, which will automatically link the sky and the ground. And then with the layers of, we did the green and then the layers of the yellow and the blue. I just did the pink flowers to bring it down, and now I'm just using white, which I will also put up in the sky a little bit after, but just touches here and there. And I don't want to go overboard with the white. So I'm just doing little clusters of these little white flowers here and there. I really like the contrast of like a lavender with green as well. So I might go in later and add here and there just little dots of lavender. And it's looking like a field of wildflowers. And a little goes a long way with the white clusters as well, because you don't want it to be too overall. Adding a little sort of cloud groupings of them kind of makes it feel more flowy in a way. And with that white for mine, I'm going to take the small brush again. Turn this sideways. And keeping with the abstract, chunkier lines, I think, which suits the painting, I'm just going to do a little bit of white on top of the yellow. You don't even need to do it on every one if you don't want to, depending on how you feel the balance of your painting is looking. Put some on top of some of the pink ones too. Sometimes what I'll do too to steady my hand when I'm doing things like that is I'll kind of put my pinky finger on the side of the canvas to steady it, so that you're not, I find it's hard for me anyways when you're just hovering your hand over to do little lines. But if you can brace yourself on the side of the canvas with your pinky, it helps a bit.
And you're a lot less likely to smear your painting, probably, as well.
Yes. And I forgot to mention earlier, but another trick you can do when doing things like that is you can put your arm or hand down in front of that and then rest your wrist on top of it and kind of do that as well. So the sky is pretty abstracted. If you wanted to do your lines in smaller strokes or really broad ones, the colors sort of work together and give the impressions of those sunset colors. And even if you were doing like more cloud-like shapes, if you wanted to go around them and give it a abstracted color treatment, you could do that too. I think since we just have a little bit of time left, I am going to go in with a lavender and add a few more lavender dots in there. Oh, lighten that lavender up because it's hard to see it in all those colors actually. Probably a lot harder to see through the camera than it is where I am with the lighting as well. But just adding another layer of a really subtle color that even if it doesn't really stand out too much, will just blend in more. Oops, sorry. So just here and there little bits of the lavender helps give it a little bit more depth.
Where do you predominantly add the lavender to? Just the same kind of dispersion as the pink?
Yep. So the way I've kind of thought about it is the blue and yellow take up the main field of color over top of that base that we did. Mm-hmm. And from a distance, blue and yellow blend together and make green. So sort of like the Impressionists will do the same thing. Instead of making like painting a field of green, they'll sometimes just do little dots of blue and yellow together. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it from a distance, it'll give the impression of green. And then on top of that, we did the pink, and then sporadically kind of put little groupings in an evenish pattern across the field, and then a little bit lighter of that pattern with the white, and then even lighter with the lavender.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. And if you wanted to try it out too, when you're done with the lavender, you can pull that up in the sky as well. I would do it along some parts of the pink. I would, and again, just like we did on the ground, just more sparingly than we did with the white here and there. I don't think it will work for my painting, but if you think you want to try it on your painting to experiment with, go ahead. But I can tell just because of the shades on mine, I don't think it'll look as good. And then for the ground, you can just go over it and over it and over again with little dots. If there's parts that you wish were a bit more green, maybe at this point, you could take a green and start adding little green bits as well. You can add more yellow if you think it needs more yellow or more blue, and just play with that and keep adding the layers of the little dots. And it'll just add more and more depth as you go.
Awesome.
And my yellow's being a little stubborn with leaving less pigment as it dries, so I'm gonna go over and put more yellow over top.
And I was just thinking, because I'm kind of mixing everything from scratch, so I actually just started using a different color blue to layer in, because I've been using the same blue the whole time.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, if you wanted to add variations of the shades you've been using, or the colors you've been using rather, that will only add even more depth.
Yeah, it seems to be working.
Yeah. In reality, as light hits objects, no matter what it is, depending on the lighting and the angle and what's around it, the colors are very, very varied when you look super up close. So the more like variation you add, the more depth it'll give. The sky here is kind of giving me a little bit of Group of Seven vibes, a little bit.
Yeah.
It reminds me, like it's kind of like the Arctic or something.
Yeah, the Yukon when like the sun doesn't set. It just like dips below the clouds and then comes back up.
So hopefully this is giving you a good base of this technique. Again, similar to the water one we did last week, you can just continue to add layers and layers. And these little dots it's a different way of adding like a blending almost, but just coming from a texture perspective. How are you guys feeling about the layers of color that you're adding onto the ground?
Good. I think you could, like you said, you could go over it and over it for ages, you know?
Yeah. And you really could with any painting. It's like that old saying, like, is a painting ever really done? You just have to decide when you're happy with it, because you can overwork it, but like I said before, if you overwork certain parts of it, you can just start the process again, like paint over it a little bit with the green or orange and just do the same process and just blend it in over and over again.
Well, I think we're probably done for today then, hey? Jay, if we wanted to
I think
send
so. I
it?
don't know if I can add more to this without
Mhm.
really changing the technique.
Yeah, I think I would love to see, because I know I've noticed with a few of these studies that we've done, you go in with your own technique and paint over it and add your kind of own touch to it.
Mhm.
Maybe it would be cool to see what you add to this one if you wanted to do like a time lapse or something like that. Um, then we could share it as a separate video.
Sure.
Just an idea.
Trying to think what I would add to this one. With the when we did the seascape, I sort of collaged over top of it and
Yes.
added a foreground and
Yes.
sort of more surreal elements. And I think something like that would be cool for this too.
Yeah, I liked your adaptation of that and the way that you added to it. It was really cool to just put stuff right on top and kind of
Hmm.
let it sit as a background more so. Okay, well
Yeah, I've
let's.
been really liking collage lately. It's a good contrast between
Mhm.
um, with the paint. It's you can definitely see the marks, and it's very you can tell like it's what you might call really painterly. Like you can really see that it's paint,
Mhm.
and with the contrast with the collage over top, which is a bit more smooth. It's just having fun with that contrast and just adding in different things
Totally.
and painting more detailed like, human figures in or birds or some bushes or stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well maybe we'll end off there for today, and we'll see if we can get a time lapse of whatever you wherever you decide to go with it after, and
Sure.
we'll have this video available on YouTube in all of its glory. I'll have to see if I can piece together all the pauses, but I think that it's possible. So I'm hoping it just downloads as one cohesive piece and we can do this from now on. Um, this is our Tuesday acrylic class with Jai Tanninen, and yeah, I think that's it.
All right.
Say bye, Jay.
Bye. Thanks.